the United States Senate to join me in doing so. And before yielding the floor, Mr. President, I have 6 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and I thank you.
Senator from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise today to thank the government of Kenya and its president, Kibaki, for the difficult decision he and his government have made with regard to Somalia. We all recall Somalia as the site of the Black Hawk Down tragedy in 1993. And as much as Americans might wish to ignore that troubled country, I don't think we can. Somalia is a country whose government collapsed in 1991, but has now given rise to what is arguably the second largest terror presence on planet Earth, called al-Shabaab. And the country also represents a new 21st century threat of piracy across America's Persian Gulf oil supply lines. Now, on October 16th, at the invitation of the Somali Transitional Federal Government, the Kenyan government launched Operation Protect the Country against the al-Shabaab terrorist organization based in Somalia. We all recall that al-Shabaab is an al-Qaeda affiliate that was designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the United States since 2008. It's responsible for multiple attacks in Somalia, in Kenya, and Uganda, including the suicide bombing in July of 2010 in Kampala that killed 76 people, including an American citizen, 25-year-old Nate Henn of North Carolina, who worked for the Invisible Children nonprofit organization. Also, on October 25th, al-Shabaab kidnapped and is still holding another American citizen, 32-year-old Jessica Buchanan of Virginia. Now, about 4,000 Kenyan troops are now approaching the critical Somali port of Kismayo, where al-Shabaab makes most of its money and is headquartered. The success of the Kenyan operation would mean a significant weakening of al-Shabaab's ability to plan and execute terrorist attacks and would greatly support the security of the region and the United States. Also joining in the fight against al-Shabaab are prominent local tribal militias, including Alu Sunna Wajimullah, the ASWJ, the Ras Kambui Front, and the Jubaland militia, formed under the former TFG Defense Minister Mohammed Abdi Mohammed. I commend the Kenyan government and allied groups for their action, and the United States and NATO should support this Kenyan action. Al-Shabaab poses a significant threat to America's national security and to Kenya's safety. Since 2009, al-Shabaab has conducted at least 10 attacks on Kenyan soil and the territorial seas along her coastline. In a particular heinous crime on October 1st, al-Shabaab kidnapped a disabled French woman on Kenyan soil and dragged her to Somalia, where she later died. Last week, al-Shabaab militants also threw a grenade into a Nairobi nightclub. Because of al-Shabaab's refusal to allow access for humanitarian organizations to relieve famine, Kenya is also now home to 600,000 Somali refugees. In many ways, the famine and distress that is now evident in Somalia should be called the al-Shabaab famine. Al-Shabaab also poses a direct threat to the United States by actively radicalizing and recruiting American citizens. On October 29th, a suicide bomber attacked an African Union base in Mogadishu, killing himself and 10 other human beings. The suspect, Abdisalan Hussein Ali, was a 22-year-old American citizen who grew up in Minneapolis and studied to be a doctor before he suddenly disappeared to join al-Shabaab in 2008. The recording that he allegedly made before his death contains a disturbing message aimed at young Americans. He said, quote, "Today, jihad is what is most important. It's not important that you become a doctor or some sort of engineer. According to the FBI, Ali was one of 30 American citizens who have now joined al-Shabaab. In August of 2010, the FBI arrested 2 and charged 12 more individuals in Minnesota, in Alabama, and California with, quote, acts of terrorism that include providing money and personnel and other material support to the Somali-based terror organization al-Shabaab. At the time, Attorney General Eric Holder called it a deadly pipeline that has routed funding and fighters to al-Shabaab from cities across the United States. On July 27th, an investigation by the House Committee on Homeland Security found the following: that al-Shabaab has an active recruitment and radicalization network inside the United States, targeting Muslim Americans in Somali communities. It ensnared a few non-Somali Muslim American converts, as well as a top Shabaab commander. At least 40 or more Americans, according to the House, have joined al-Shabaab. So many Americans have joined that at least 15 of them have now been killed in fighting for Shabaab, as well as 3 Canadian citizens. The 3 Americans who returned to the U.S. were prosecuted, and 1 awaits extradition in the Netherlands, and at least 21 more American al-Shabaab members are overseas and remain unaccounted for and pose a direct threat to the U.S. homeland. The House said that al-Shabaab has the intent and capability to conduct attacks or to aid the core of al-Qaeda or al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen to strike U.S. interest or our homeland. They said that al-Shabaab has openly pledged loyalty and support to al-Qaeda and al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen, and has cemented an alarming set of operational ties to both groups. The House report also points out that after the successful U.S. operation to kill Osama bin Laden, al-Shabaab's leadership eulogized bin Laden and vowed revenge against the United States. Omar Hamani, another al-Shabaab leader raised in the United States, said, quote, he swore a blood revenge against his own homeland for the May 1st killing of Osama bin Laden. Al-Shabaab poses a grave threat to regional stability and to our own national security. I thank the Kenyan government and their allies in Somalia for taking action. Our administration and our NATO allies should support Kenya. We should also make sure that in this support, we have the objective to collapse al-Shabaab in Somalia. With luck, while al-Shabaab may have found a recruit or 2 more among American citizens to wage jihad against their own country, there hopefully will be no al-Shabaab to fight for if they ever reach Somalia. Mr. President, I yield back.
Senator from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are currently, I believe, debating the motion to proceed and to go to the energy, water, et cetera package, I think. And included in that is the proposal of the President that he has sent up here asking the Senate to vote on the question of an infrastructure bank. There was a prior vote, I believe, in the Senate on that in the context of the Jobs Act, which we all know failed at that time. And there are some signs that this may wind up being a partisan effort here. But I hope colleagues will stop and think very, very carefully about the infrastructure bank proposal and what it represents to our country. And whether or not we can get it over the hurdle at this moment, I don't know. But it is an idea whose time has come, and I'm confident that in the next weeks or months, hopefully, the Senate will embrace this concept. And the reason for doing so is really very simple. I mean, colleagues on both sides of the aisle are increasingly reminded when they go home, as well as familiar here, just in the general dialogue about where we're going in our country, are increasingly aware of the enormous deficit reduction, it's on my mind, of the infrastructure deficit that we face in the country as a whole. And so I want colleagues to stop and think hard about a simple question. How are we going to build America? How are we going to build America going forward so that we can do what our parents and our grandparents did for us, which is provide us with the basic infrastructure of a nation that has been able to allow people to move easily from home to work to places of commerce across the country, an interstate highway system, all of our airports, our train stations, all of the assets that provide for the strength of our nation and for the kind of communities that we live in. None of it just appeared out of nowhere. It was built because people had a vision. People had an idea about how you make communities strong and also how economies work. The fact is that some of the greatest projects in our country, whether it's some of the great bridges that we look at today, Golden Gate Bridge, Triborough, George Washington, countless bridges across the Potomac elsewhere, the tunnels, the roads, our water treatment facilities, our airports and the airline system that we have, all of these things have contributed to the strength of our country. But everyone here knows that we're not currently pursuing a set of projects that are calculated to make America more competitive and to continue that rich history and tradition of building for the future. We're busy living off the assets that were created by the generations that preceded us. And so the question has to be asked by every colleague here. Are we going to appropriate the money for grants? And the answer is no. Partly because the deficit and the debt are telling us in loud terms we don't have those kinds of funds right now, but also because everybody here sees the difficulty we're having just trying to get the highway bill reauthorized or the FAA bill authorized in order to do the things we need to do. So the proposal for an infrastructure bank is a proposal that recognizes this fiscal reality. We simply don't have and will not allocate the types of funds necessary to do the job that every American knows has to be done. That doesn't mean the job can't be done. There's a way to do it, and the way to do it is to invite other people's money, the private sector, not the tax dollar, to come to the table and invest in these projects where these projects have revenue streams that will support that kind of investment. So one of the important features of the infrastructure bank that I ask colleagues to really focus on is the fact that this bank is not a grant entity. There will be no grants. It is exclusively loans, and exclusively loans that meet the fiduciary test of its ability to be able to be repaid, to have a revenue stream that will support the loan itself. And I would say to my colleagues, some of them I know have asked me occasionally, well, is this going to be an entity like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac? Is it going to be one of those government-supported entities that got some folks in trouble? And the answer is no. Resoundingly and profoundly, no. It is not similar in any way whatsoever. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac issued stock. They were for-profit entities listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So they were using the federal guarantee on a loan to actually leverage their position in the marketplace in competition with other entities and for profit. This bank is not for profit, no issuance of stock, will not be listed on any exchange, will exist exclusively for the purpose of lending to those types of projects that meet the highest fiscal standards with respect to the ability of those projects to be repaid. In fact, in each and every lending situation, the infrastructure bank will make a risk analysis, just as you do on any deal in Wall Street. There's a risk analysis, and the risk factor will be assigned to that deal, and in fact, fees will be charged to the borrowers, to the deal makers, in order to cover that level of risk, and that will be part of the cost of the transaction. The benefit of this infrastructure bank is that by virtue of the Treasury Department providing a discount for the Federal Treasury guarantee, you actually make the loan attractive in terms of the private sector and competition, and it does so at a level, as I said, of risk analysis that doesn't put the federal government or the taxpayer on line and at risk for the measured level of the loan itself, but only the risk is credited or put on the books in terms of what is carried by the Treasury Department as the risk of this particular loan. So, in fact, it's really, if you look at the types of projects that are authorized by this, only energy projects, only transportation projects, and only water projects. In the better part of the country, they are limited to a $100 million size or up, and there's a set-aside for rural communities, and in the rural communities, the level of loans could be $25 million or up, because obviously in parts of rural America, you have smaller kinds of projects, and we want everybody in the country to be able to share from the benefits of this kind of infrastructure bank. I would say to my colleagues that this bank has bipartisan support. It has been introduced in slightly different form from the form the President has put in it, but the fundamentals of the bank and its structure and concept are the same. It has been introduced by Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson of Texas, who's a co-author. Senator Lindsey Graham, South Carolina, supports it. Senator Mark Warner, those are the original co-sponsors. But it has other co-sponsors and broader support, including, I might add, the United States Chamber of Commerce is a strong supporter of the infrastructure bank and was present at the announcement of this legislation, as well as the AFL-CIO. Now, Mr. President, why is this infrastructure bank necessary? What is it that we need? Well, everybody knows that the experts are telling us we have a $2.2 trillion infrastructure deficit in America. That means there are over $2.2 trillion of projects around the country, countless bridges in countless communities around the country, where people, or roads, or tunnels, or airports, I mean, countless projects which need to be repaired, upgraded, or put in place at first instance. And we're that far behind. We're $2.2 trillion in deficit to what we ought to be doing. The American Civil Society of Architects and Engineers tells us that we could spend about $250 billion a year for the next 40 years just to bring our roads up to par. And we're not about to do that. We know, because we don't have the money, because we're not getting that kind of an appropriation now for our initiatives. So just listen to what Oklahoma City Mayor Mick Cornett says. Quote, "Mayors see up close the deferred maintenance that's going on in the nation's cities. It's just a ticking time bomb. We also know that it puts people to work." Well, Cornett is president of the Republican Mayors and Local Officials Coalition within the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And he knows what he's talking about in terms of this deferred maintenance. But the truth is, every senator here knows you can go back home and find mayors and state senators, state reps, the governors, the departments of transportation, all of whom are pleading with us to try to help provide the kinds of funding necessary because they're simply overwhelmed. And I might add, Mr. President, many of our states are living under court orders to do some of these projects, particularly the water, the combined sewer overflow, water treatment facilities where communities have sued, and you need to do these projects in order to meet the standards. And they're under court order without understanding where the money is going to come from, but they're under a court order. The fact is, Mr. President, that whether or not we decide to do these things is really going to determine how competitive America is going to be. Right now, everybody knows we are facing a transformational economic challenge. It's different from the challenge we faced in the last century. During that period of time, as we came out of World War II, we were the only major economy in the world left standing. And at the end of the war, we had both the vision and foresight, intelligence, as well as the courage to put a lot of money on the line in the Marshall Plan to help rebuild Europe and rebuild Japan. And we saw throughout the Cold War the ways in which that investment paid back for the United States of America, indeed for the Western world, and for the values that we made central to that kind of an investment. So, Mr. President, that's changed. It started change in the 80s and 90s, and now we're seeing with the rise of less developed countries who are, after all, doing the very thing that we encouraged them to do. We told them you've got to, liberate your societies to be able to go out and compete in the marketplace, that they needed to open up that market, that they needed to trade, they needed to excite capital formation and invest and so forth. That's exactly what they've done. They haven't changed their political systems in many cases, which remain authoritarian and closed and one party, but they have certainly changed their economic systems. And in the doing so, they've transformed the marketplace that we're competing in. So the United States is not looking at the same playing field where we had unlimited resources, unlimited capacity to go out and, frankly, win. And we could win many times without really even trying that hard. But now other people are doing the same things that we took for granted. And so they're competing in science, they're competing in technology, they're competing in manufacturing, they're competing in software, they're competing in all kinds of things that were our domain for a long period of time. And the market globally has changed significantly enough that we're facing a challenge to our ability to be able to remain the #1 economy. I just heard today that China probably will be the #1 economy in the world within 5 or 6 years, much faster than we had anticipated previously. So if the United States is going to compete and get its act together going forward, we have to invest in the infrastructure of our country, because that's how you, #1, you create jobs, but #2, you provide the ability to move goods, to provide for people, to provide for the quality of life, and the kinds of institutions that make a difference to our ability to be able to compete and to live the quality of life that we want. Mr. President, the figures of other people's commitment to infrastructure tells us the story. China is investing 9% of its gross domestic product in infrastructure. Europe is investing 5% of its GDP in infrastructure. Here in the United States, we're investing somewhere around 2%. Figures vary, 2.2%, 2.1%, 2%. And I think Brazil invested over $240 billion in its infrastructure just in the last 3 years. And the Brazilian economy is growing in the double digits. North Korea, Mexico, Brazil, China, India, all growing in the double digits, and the United States is stuck in this recession. Maybe just breaking out of it, but with very uneven growth. So, Mr. President, the infrastructure bank is geared to fill a void in our investment abilities here in the country. Again, senators know we're not going to invest billions of dollars of appropriated money, of taxpayers' dollars, because of the competition we have in our discretionary funds now, because of the way we're heading in terms of the fiscal cliff and debt cliff, and because of the challenge of the rise of cost of health care and entitlements, and we don't have that money. So while we get control over those components of our economy, we need to be investing in the infrastructure of our nation, in putting people back to work. We need to invest in highways, roads, bridges, mass transit, inland waterways, commercial ports, airports, air traffic control systems, passenger rail, including high-speed rail, freight rail systems. In the water sector, we could invest in water waste treatment facilities, stormwater management systems, dams, drinking water treatment facilities, levees, open space management systems. And in the energy sector, we need transmission in America. We need an energy grid that is modern. We need distribution, storage, energy enhancements for buildings, public and commercial. There's an extraordinary amount of work to be done if we will decide to do it. Hundreds of billions of dollars is sitting on the sidelines right now. It could come in and help us with these projects. And the Infrastructure Bank is precisely the entity that will bring that private capital to the table so that it's the Chinese who are investing in an American infrastructure project that they can't take back to China. It's here in America. It improves our lives, but it gives them a return on investment for the money that they put on the line in a deal which, frankly, are the kinds of deals that will produce the sort of long-term patient capital investment that I think a lot of people are going to be turning to, given the nature of the financial turmoil that we see going on in the world today. But we are in a competitive race with other countries to attract this private equity investment. An infrastructure bank could help us put that money to work right here at home. Now, some people say, well, Senator, why do you need the infrastructure bank to do this? If these deals are so attractive, why won't the money just come and they'll invest it in anyway and so forth? Well, it doesn't quite work that way for a number of reasons. First of all, our financial institutions have not developed a long-term infrastructure lending business. We don't have that in this country the way other banks in other parts of the world do. If you look at a major American infrastructure transaction over the last few years, guess what? Non-U.S. banks, mostly Australian and European, are the ones providing most of the financing. And they're doing it at an average of 20 to 1. 20 parts by the non-U.S. banks, by the European, Australian banks, and 1 part U.S. investment. And given the troubles that the European sovereign market has today, I think it's going to be a long time before we're going to see a lot of European banks looking to invest over here. Maybe I'm wrong. But the lack of investing by our institutions is not because the investment is too risky. The problem is that for a very long time, the vast majority of American infrastructure has been financed through the municipal bond market, and the rest largely through federal grants, which I've said are now under pressure. So there's been no need for large bank lending to be created. And as we all know, large bank lending, that market just doesn't happen overnight. The municipal bond market also relies principally on small retail investors for most of its funding. And because of the way that it's designed, it can't access large global pools of capital, or for that matter, pension funds. Pension funds are prohibited from investing in those bonds. So the municipal bond market is simply not well suited to fund large cross-state, cross-boundary projects. So we need something else. And that something else is this kind of infrastructure bank with all of the very strict limits that have been put in place to keep it from reaching too far. It doesn't cost a lot of money. For $10 billion of startup funding, It becomes self-financing. Every loan is a loan that will be repaid or can be repaid because they rely on sources of revenue that are among the most dependable sources of revenue in the marketplace. They come from energy projects that sell electricity, and the people, you have a pretty regular stream of buyers for that. You have a pretty regular stream of people who need water in their homes, who pay for the water. I mean, all of these revenue streams, the tolls on bridges, for instance, these have a certainty to them and a longevity to them that make these kinds of deals very attractive. I would just say to my colleagues that one of the silver linings of this kind of infrastructure investment is this. For every $1 billion, the Federal Highway Administration tells us you'll create, I think it's 30,000 jobs, according to the Highway Administration. The range of jobs, depending on who you listen to, goes from about 20,000 to 35,000. Let's say it's 20,000 jobs per billion. People say this bank investment of $10 billion can leverage more than $500 billion, $500 billion of investment. You're talking 20 million jobs, 20 million over the course of perhaps 10 years. Mr. President, I think there's, so many compelling reasons for engaging in this. Europe has an infrastructure bank. We have state infrastructure banks. But the state infrastructure banks don't have the advantage that this bank has of being able to do transboundary, cross-state deals. And they also don't have the advantage of having a discount on the lending component coming through the Treasury Department of the federal component of this, done, as I said, under the strictest fiduciary standards. Mr. President, only 50% of any project can be lending. The rest has to be equity, and it has to be invested by the other investors in the deal. It can be a combination of investors, but they need to invest. So I just close by saying to colleagues that a modern infrastructure is really the lifeblood of our economy. I don't know how many of my colleagues have taken the Acela to New York, but it's a train that has the ability to go 150 miles an hour. It only goes 150 miles an hour between here and New York for about 18 miles of the trip, because you can't go fast under the Baltimore Tunnel because the vibrations might cause it to fall in. You can't go fast over the bridges of the Chesapeake because the train will wind up in the Chesapeake. I mean, this is absurd. Many of us have had the pleasure of having a train ride in China. I rode recently from Beijing to Tianjin. A trip that used to take 8 to 10 hours takes 29 minutes, and you're going 200 miles an hour, and the water on your table is barely jiggling during the entire ride. It's an extraordinary accomplishment, and they're building something like 55,000 miles of that kind of high-speed rail system over there as they spend their 9% of GDP on infrastructure. So we can do better. The United States of America can do better. We know that. We're the country that had invention and building, construction in our DNA. We're the country that went to the moon. We're the country that developed these extraordinary technologies that now connect human beings all around the world instantaneously. I am convinced that if we put this infrastructure bank together, we will find all of a sudden that the United States is going to attract capital, create jobs, modernize our economy, and have benefits that spill out all across our nation. And I hope our colleagues will get rid of the politics and embrace this idea, which is long overdue. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Senator from Oregon is recognized.
Mr. President, before he leaves the floor, I just want to commend the senator from Massachusetts. He has said much this afternoon that I certainly agree with, but I also want to touch on one other point about the senator's work, the senators from Massachusetts' efforts in this area, and that is that the public, perhaps more than anything else, is talking about why people in Washington, D.C. can't work together, why we can't come up with ways to build coalitions. And I'm not sure people picked up on it in your remarks, and particularly your remarks with respect to China are indisputably right. They are investing far more than we are. But you have pulled together the Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO for an infrastructure package. That doesn't happen by osmosis. It doesn't just happen because somebody puts out, a press release. You put in the time to try to build that coalition, which, of course, is key to getting bipartisan support up here. And I just want you to know, I very much appreciate it. I know you brought exactly the same approach to your work on the super committee, trying to find common ground on some of the most challenging, issues, how we're going to generate growth, how we're going to deal with health care costs. I have some remarks to make, but I'm glad I had a chance to come over and listen to you, Senator Kerry, because I thought this afternoon the point you made about bringing people together, and I hope people will say as we look at this transportation package, and I just want to get on the bill, frankly, so we could open up other kinds of ideas, that you have logged a lot of time, and it has paid off with coalitions like the Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO, and I want the public to know that, in my view, is the kind of approach that's going to let us solve some of these big problems, and I just want to commend you for it.
Mr. President, I just want to thank my friend from Oregon. I really appreciate it. There's nobody who works harder on building those coalitions. The Senator's done a superb job on health care, on tax policy, so those words mean a lot, and I appreciate it enormously. Thank you.
We're going to be working together on a variety of fronts, and I thank the Senator. Mr. President, my sense is that if you tune in on the Senate today, and of course the waves of the Senate are always hard to follow. The distinguished President of the Senate has been involved in the effort to change the Byzantine rules of the Senate and has a sense of what I'm talking about. You try to figure out what the Senate is up to, and at this point, you've learned that the Senate is today working on infrastructure. You hear the word infrastructure repeated again and again. And you roll your eyes and you say, wake me when the potholes get fixed. So what I'd like to do for a few minutes this afternoon is try to tie this to what I believe is first and foremost on the minds of the American people, and that is jobs. That's what we hear about morning, noon, and night, Mr. President, and the fact is you cannot have big league economic growth in America with little league transportation systems. It's just not possible. If your bridges and your roads are falling apart, you simply cannot have the growth that we need, and those jobs and the growth are the number one issue for our people, and literally infrastructure, improvements in roads, bridges, and transportation systems and jobs are two sides of the same coin. They go hand in hand. So that's point number one. Point number two, Mr. President, touches on this question of how we stack up to some of our competitors worldwide. If you can't move goods and services efficiently in this country, our businesses are practically in the position where they have to put up a sign and say, we can't compete with China. Because when China is making these kinds of investments that we heard Senator Kerry and other colleagues on both sides of the aisle talk about in the last few days, you know what we are up against. Transportation is the key to moving goods and services efficiently. We have bottlenecks, for example, in my part of the country, in the metropolitan area, and frankly, in rural areas where people couldn't have dreamed there would be a traffic jam even a few years ago. Point number three, and that is that there is no economic multiplier in our country like transportation. When you make investments, well-targeted investments in transportation, you create jobs for the folks who are building those projects. You create jobs for the people who are selling the equipment. You are creating jobs for folks like the people in the restaurants who make the ham sandwiches, for the workers who are out there building the projects and trying to find ways to help our people avoid traffic and save gas as they try to get to and from work. So this is a big economic multiplier. And fourth, Mr. President, as you know from your experience as a Westerner, the history of our part of the world is that private investment has always followed well-targeted public investments. You look all over the West and the great distances that our folks have to travel, you look and you will see again and again that the key to getting more private sector investment, which is, in my view, the key to economic recovery. It's that private sector job growth that's behind the tax reform bill I have with Senator Coates, first bipartisan tax reform bill. We need private sector job growth in the West. The history of our region is that private sector employment has traditionally followed public investments, well-targeted public investments. Now, what I want to see us do, Mr. President, what the vote is all about coming up, is to give us a chance to move to the bill. And if we move to the bill, I believe there are all kinds of opportunities for Democrats and Republicans through amendments and a variety of opportunities to exchange ideas to come up with bipartisan approaches. And I've had a chance to be part of those kinds of discussions in the last few years. I mean, you look, for example, at the common ground that has developed between Senator Boxer and Senator Inhofe on the Environment and Public Works Committee. They are making a lot of progress in reauthorizing a transportation bill. That's only one example here in the Senate of Democrats and Republicans coming together. Let me cite, two others. In the Economic Recovery Act, Mr. President, I had a chance in the Senate Finance Committee to advance an idea that I've been working on for more than 5 years. And there was a very large bipartisan group of us that had worked on it. Former Senator Talent was the original Republican, but Senator Thune was involved, Senator Wicker, Senator Collins, a very large bipartisan group working with colleagues on our side of the aisle. The senator from Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, is one that comes to mind, who has been a very thoughtful advocate of improvements in transportation. So in the Senate Finance Committee, as we move forward with the Economic Recovery Act, Chairman Baucus and then Ranking Minority Member Senator Grassley, in effect, said, well, we've been hearing about some of these ideas that this bipartisan group has been advancing. Let's give them a chance to make their case. And I offered the proposal to create something called Build America Bonds, Mr. President. And this was a chance for the first time, to move the federal government into the bonding area. It's long, of course, been done at the state and local level. It had received good reviews from the private sector. And I recall the day when Senator Baucus and Senator Grassley asked me what I predicted in terms of the results of Build America Bonds. And I said, we've got basically about a year and a half. As you know, the Recovery Act was passed in the winter of 2009. The IRS had to implement the rules. Mr. President, when we wrapped up the period for which you could issue Build America bonds, more than $181 billion worth of Build America bonds had been used all across the country for capital infrastructure projects. And they had been used in big parts of the East Coast of the United States. New Jersey, Turnpike was one, and they had been used for roads in southern Oregon. And if you want to talk efficiency, look at the website of our state treasurer, Ted Wheeler, who said that they were saving in our state 10% by issuing these Build America bonds. I see my friend from California here, Senator Feinstein. California was one of the largest users of Build America bonds, and to have a program that was envisioned as perhaps selling $5 or $6 billion worth of bonds, sell more than $180 billion, Mr. President, is an example of what we can do on a bipartisan basis that will put people to work and will actually save money. And the savings that we found in Oregon can also be illustrated by the analysis done by the Department of Treasury that finds the same sort of savings that we found in Oregon. Now, with respect to Build America bonds, in some respects they were too successful people said, oh, perhaps they're being used for more kinds of projects than was acceptable to some people. So once again, we said we're going to come back and try to find a way to generate bipartisan support. And my colleague from North Dakota, Sarah Hoeven, we got together and we put forward another proposal, a different kind of version that we call the TRIPS program, the Transportation and Regional Infrastructure program. And our plan would allow state infrastructure banks to issue bonds that pay for transportation projects, once again having a small supportive role from the federal government. The folks who run the numbers at the Joint Committee on Taxation say that with this bipartisan proposal, a Republican from North Dakota, a Democrat from the state of Oregon, it would be possible to get $50 billion worth of transportation projects with this model with only $12 billion worth of costs over 10 years. Now, Mr. President, I only illustrate the fact that if it's possible to get on the bill, I think we're going to see colleagues on the Republican and the Democratic side look to try to cooperate and find some common ground. Senator Kerry made the point about the infrastructure bank, how he got the support of the Chamber of Commerce and Senator Graham and Senator Hutchison and others. I've gone through some of the history of other transportation efforts, the progress that's being made now with Senator Boxer and Senator Inhofe on the transportation bill, the Build America Bonds effort, which produced a 30-fold increase over what was anticipated, literally revolutionizing the municipal bond market, and for projects big, like the New Jersey Turnpike, and small, like roads in southern Oregon. And now we're seeing that if we can go to this bill, and that's what the vote is really all about, whether we can actually get on the bill, be able to offer alternatives and ideas, and frankly, there are provisions in the bill that is in its current form. I don't see how anybody can be against. The question of highway repair, I mean, that's about as fundamental a function of government as anything you can imagine. So there's plenty in this bill that I think colleagues on both sides of the aisle could support. I've cited a number of examples of bipartisanship in this area where we can do more in the infrastructure field while we save money. And I just hope colleagues will vote, and I gather the vote will be tomorrow, to move to the bill and give us a chance to get serious about what I think is central to growing the American economy, and that is well-targeted investments in transportation. And to me, the question of job creation and infrastructure are literally two sides of the same coin, and I hope the Senate moves to this legislation tomorrow and it begins to beef up our effort to deal with a fundamental part of job creation in this country, so fundamental that in much of the country, if we don't make the investments, it will literally be the equivalent of saying to our businesses, put up a sign, you're not going to be in a position to compete with China right now, come back another time. That's unacceptable to me. It's unacceptable to Oregon businesses and Oregon workers, and that's why I hope my colleagues will vote to go to the bill. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President.
Senator from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to thank the senator from Oregon and the senator from Massachusetts. I happened to hear both of their comments, and they're both very good, and they're both right on. And I was thinking, Senator, while you spoke, about the fact that in the past 6 months, those of us on this side have tried on 4 different occasions to pass legislation related to jobs. We began on May 4th to reauthorize the Small Business Innovation Research Program, which would direct grants to small businesses to develop technologies. It fell on a cloture vote, didn't get 60 votes, only got 52. Then to reauthorize the Economic Development Administration, which I think most of us know essentially is a cost share for communities in distress. That didn't get cloture, 49 to 51. Then we tried on the President's Big Job Act on October 11th. That vote fell, did not get cloture, only got 50 votes. And then we tried, by just taking a part of it, on October the 20th, to fund 400,000 school jobs and more than thousands of jobs for police and fire departments, first responders throughout the nation, paid for with a 0.5% surtax on people who could well afford to pay for it and probably would want to pay for it. That fell on a 50-50 vote, did not get the 60 votes for cloture. And so now today we are trying for a fifth time on a part of the President's bill which has to do with infrastructure. And again, there is a pay for. It's paid for by a 0.7% tax on people who can well afford to pay that 7%. I think you and I both know the value of keeping this nation number one. We come from the West. We're on a burgeoning trade basin. We seek competition with countries that have booming infrastructure, and we see the plugs and the bumps and the stoppages in this country because of an absence of adequate infrastructure. So I'm really delighted that you're here and that we share this same cause. And hopefully there's going to be some change in the mindset on the other side of this great hall, and people will realize if we're going to remain number one, and we're really not number one, and I'll go into that in my speech, then we have to pass this segment of the President's bill. So I thank you very much, Senator Wyden, for your comments. As I just said, this legislation offered by the Majority Leader includes the key infrastructure provisions of the President's Jobs Act. It's $50 billion for our roads, bridges, airports, and transit systems, and it capitalizes a freestanding infrastructure bank with $10 billion. This bill makes the investment without increasing the deficit. Funds appropriated are offset by a 0.7% surcharge on people that can afford it only. I come from a state where unemployment is high, 11.9%, and employment in our construction sector is down 44%, as you can see from this chart. This is actually California's construction jobs, and you can see where it was in 2000. You see it rise to 900,000 in 2006, and since that time, it's become a plummet. And the fact of the matter is that construction, to a great extent, drives the economy in a number of states, and I think California heads that list. So infrastructure and employment go directly together. Last week, this body passed legislation authorizing the sale of power from the Hoover Dam. Now, Hoover's a dam on the border between Nevada and Arizona, and it was built in the 1930s. But it reminded me of the invaluable contribution that infrastructure investments have made in generations past. During the depths of the Great Depression, we stepped forward to help build Hoover Dam. And between 1931 and 1936, our nation made a massive effort involving thousands of workers, more than 100 of whom lost their lives, to build a power plant unlike anything the world had ever seen. And this is kind of a working picture of Hoover Dam being built. At the time, many in Congress argued that the cost of this engineering marvel was too high and the investment of taxpayer dollars too risky. They opposed efforts to invent an unproven energy technology like hydropower. The debate was strikingly similar to the debates we hear today. Now, luckily, for the people of California, believers in American infrastructure and technology, won the Hoover Dam debate. As the years have passed, the investment has been repaid, and the wisdom of Congress's investment remains clear. Today, Hoover Dam, all these years later, is still owned by the American people, and it produces power for the southwestern United States at less than 1/4 of the market price. It is the quintessential example of why infrastructure spending and investment makes sense. During the depths of the Depression, it gave people jobs and hope, but its benefits were permanent, not fleeting. The investment made in the 1930s is still paying dividends for the economy of the Southwest. Now, today, this legislation invests $50 billion in America's transportation infrastructure. That's specifically $27 for highways, $9 billion for transit, $4 billion for high-speed rail, $2 billion for Amtrak rail improvements, $3 for airports and air traffic control modernization, and $5 billion for discretionary grants and TIFIA loans to multimodal projects. These funds are actually in addition to funding levels in the Surface Transportation Bill, which authorizes $52 billion annually, and the FAA authorization, which authorizes $16 billion annually. The proposal also appropriates $10 billion to capitalize an infrastructure bank. With its own appointed board and CEO, this bank would have the power to issue loan guarantees and loans at the federal funds rate to large projects in water, transportation, and energy. The bank's authority is similar to the functions performed by EPA's State Revolving Fund, the DOE's Loan Guarantee Program, and the Department of Transportation's TIFIA and RIF programs. In the long term, centralizing these functions in a single infrastructure bank will establish more consistent lending rules and policies. So I think a lot of us have gotten together from time to time to see what could be done to fund a real infrastructure bank. Presently, when we build infrastructure, we have no way of financing it. You put up the whole cost up front. Well, most states and cities don't fund their infrastructure that way. They float bonds and they're amortized over time. So the ability to have an infrastructure bank, to loan money, to look at various instruments to move infrastructure production throughout this country, I think is vital. And because the bank will lend, not grant funds, it will leverage $10 billion into approximately $100 billion in actual investment dollars. The bank would be particularly beneficial to California, I must say that, and we lead the application list for federal financing assistance. For example, Los Angeles' citizens voted to tax themselves by raising the sales tax in order to build a desperately needed subway and transit system. They seek a federal loan. They have the money to pay it back. It comes every year due in sales taxes, but they seek a federal loan to build the system in 10 years, not 30 years, because they need it sooner rather than later. The County of Riverside seeks a federal loan to build a toll road on the Highway 91 goods movement corridor, through which millions of containers move from the ports of LA, Long Beach, to every community in America. I think most people in this body don't understand that approximately 50% of all of the containers that come into this country, East Coast, West Coast, come in at LA, Long Beach, 40 to 50%. And they go out in multimodal areas in stacked trains into the Midwest. But they run into all kinds of impediments. And there's not separated grade, there's not the ability to really move these trains as rapidly as they should be. So if we're going to keep up with the delivery of cargo into the heartland of this country, most of which comes from Asia, we really need to do something. California's communities are prepared to repay these loans, but they need help in beginning. The Federal Highway Administration estimates that for every $1 billion of federal transportation spending, 27,822 jobs are produced. It is one of the biggest bang-for-the-buck programs I know of. For every $1 billion in spending, nearly 30,000 jobs are generated. So this bill is a job generator. And for every $1 spent on infrastructure projects, it also spurs economic activity, raising the level of gross domestic product by $1.59. So, what's the conclusion? Investing in infrastructure is essential to addressing our nationwide unemployment crisis. And oh, I only wish we could see this. Congestion is a big problem in this country. I told you about LA, Long Beach. What I should also tell you is that the average Los Angeles commuter spends 63 hours per year stuck in traffic. That costs $1,400 a person. In Greater Los Angeles, commuters spend 515 million hours stuck in traffic every year. They waste 407 million gallons of fuel at a total economic cost of $12 billion. That's just L.A. I see the senator from Illinois is on the floor. That's just L.A. I wonder what the Chicago numbers would be. They've got to be large. San Francisco, San Jose, San Diego, and Riverside County face all the similar congestion. In each area, the average commuter spends more than 30 hours a year stuck in traffic. That cost is $6.4 billion. And nationwide, congestion is causing Americans to travel 4.8 billion hours more and to purchase an extra 3.9 billion gallons of fuel for a congestion cost of $115 billion in 1 year. That year happens to be 2009. This is the equivalent of wasting 130 days of flow from the Alaska pipeline each year. It's enormous. So, is this bill necessary? The answer is clearly a resounding yes. In my state, 66% of our major roads are in poor condition. 68% of our urban interstates are congested. Vehicle travel on our highways increased by 27% from 1990 to 2007, and 30% of our bridges are structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. One of the best infrastructure projects in the nation is really the repair of Doyle Drive going onto the Golden Gate Bridge. And Senator, I wish you could see it, because this is a stimulus project, and it is amazing because you actually see these dollars at work. And huge, huge ramps are being rebuilt, going down to ground level, and this great icon of America, the Golden Gate Bridge, would never be rebuilt today. I mean, we just wouldn't build it. And if we did, it'd take 100 years to do it with all the permits we need. But it's there, it's an icon, and there is a major infrastructure package working on it. Our nation's deteriorating surface transportation infrastructure is going to cost the economy more than 876,000 jobs. It's going to suppress GDP growth. It's estimated by $897 billion by 2020. Poor road conditions cost United States motorists $67 billion a year in repairs and operating costs, $333 per motorist. Failing infrastructure will drive the cost of doing business in this country up by $430 billion in the next decade, as the cost to ship goods and raw materials will increase due to bottlenecks in roads that beat up vehicles. There was a time when America built big things. In the 1800s, we built the Transcontinental Railroad in one of the great private-public partnerships of all time. We built projects like the Bay Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Hoover Dam in the 20s and the 30s. In the 50s and 60s, we built an interstate highway system, unlike anything else anywhere on the planet. In the 70s, we built the Bay Area Rapid Transit System in San Francisco. This multi-decade investment gave America an economic advantage over every country around the world. Now listen to this. As recently as 2005, the World Economic Forum rated U.S. infrastructure as #1 for economic competitiveness. #1 in 2005 for economic competitiveness. But in just 5 years, we have slipped to number 15. Not 5, not 10, but 15 in 5 years, because we haven't kept up what is a deteriorating infrastructure caused by overuse. The argument is so solid to pass this bill, I can't understand how anyone could vote against it. China is spending today 9% of its GDP on infrastructure. They're our competition. I live on the Pacific Rim. I can tell you, every time any one of us goes to China, they will look around a city, whether it's Beijing or Shanghai, and you will count 20 to 50 cranes building in that city, improving infrastructure. I stood in Shanghai when the head of the government told me, in 10 years we will build 375 kilometers of underground subway, 25 stations, and guess what? They did it and are doing it. We can't do that. It's a problem. Of course, China doesn't have NEPA, doesn't have CEQA, it doesn't have 3 dozen permits you have to get. It's easy to write a letter to Mrs. Lee or Mrs. Chu and say you will move in 30 days because your apartment building is going to be destroyed. That doesn't happen here. But there is no excuse not to do what is in this bill. There is no impediment to do what is in this bill. And maybe, might not take us back to #1, but it might just take us back to #3 or #4. China spends 9%. Do you know what we spend? Well, I'll tell you. According to The Economist, on April 28th, we spent 2% of GDP on infrastructure. So a lot of people are doing columns on whether America remains #1 in the world, whether we have lost our clout, whether we have lost our competitiveness, whether we have lost our ability to invest in the future. And this bill is a good testing ground, because this measure is all infrastructure, with the ability to get it done in the future by a bank that can specialize in the arena. So it's a good test. And it seems to me, if we want this country to be #1, that we have to vote yes. I believe the will is on this side of the aisle, and I send a challenge to the other side of the aisle. There is no reason not to vote for this bill. Thank you very much. I yield the floor.